Hi, I'm Allie Howell, Trial and Appellate Counsel for the Upper Midwest Law Center, Minnesota's nonprofit public interest law firm that fights for liberty and the rule of law. Welcome back to another episode of Minnesota Law Weekly, where we update you on important developments on legal issues in Minnesota and tell you about the ways in which we at the UMLC are fighting for you in the courts. Today, we are talking about the new social studies standards proposed for Minnesota students in grades K through 12. These are standards that identify the knowledge and skills Minnesota students must have at the end of each grade level in order to graduate. Last year, the Minnesota Department of Education proposed radical amendments to the social studies standards. Unlike in previous years, the new standards are not grade level specific, but ask kindergartners to meet the same standards as high school seniors. Notably, the new standards also add an ethnic studies component to education in Minnesota. Although the Minnesota legislature tasked the department with embedding Indigenous education into the academic standards this year, the legislature has never required separate standards for ethnic studies like it does for geography, history, and economics. Understandably, many Minnesotans were concerned about these new standards, and in Minnesota, the Department of Education does not get to do whatever it wants. First, there are rules set by the state that it must follow. The standards the department issues must be clear, concise, objective, measurable, and grade level appropriate. They also cannot require teachers to use a specific teaching methodology or curriculum. Second, the department has to listen to feedback by opening its proposed rules for public comment, and, if enough Minnesotans demand it, a public hearing before an administrative law judge is required. In response to these standards, Minnesotans submitted written comments to the Minnesota Office of Administrative Hearings, and hundreds showed up at the public hearing. At that hearing, the department was required to demonstrate that the proposed social studies standards are needed and reasonable. Here at the Upper Midwest Law Center, we submitted detailed public comments. In our comments, we explained that the new standards are not grade level appropriate as required by Minnesota law because what is appropriate for a kindergartner is not appropriate for a 12th grader, and vice versa. For example, the economic inquiry standards require students to use economic models and reasoning and data analysis to construct an argument and propose a solution related to an economic question, and evaluate the impact of the proposed solution on various communities that would be affected. Obviously, kindergartners still learning to tie their shoes are not capable of this. Additionally, we argue that the proposed ethnic studies standards were not consistent with the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. These standards, for example, include a requirement focused on resistance, under which students are expected to describe how individuals and communities have fought for freedom and liberation against systemic and coordinated exercises of power locally and globally. In addition to identifying strategies that have resulted in lasting change, students must also organize with others to engage in activities that could further the rights and dignity of all. There is also a new Ways of Knowing Methodologies standard that asks students to use ethnic and indigenous studies methods and sources in order to understand the roots of contemporary systems of oppression and apply lessons from the past in order to eliminate historical and contemporary injustices. We believe that students cannot be compelled to engage in political speech through activism in order to graduate. There is another problem with the ethnic studies standards as well. We argue that some of the proposed standards were not measurable, objective, or clear, as is also required by state law. It is impossible to measure when students have successfully organized with others to engage in activities that further the rights and dignity of all. Here at the Upper Midwest Law Center, we try to do just that every day. But it is unlikely that the Department of Education would agree that our type of advocacy meets their standards. And how are kindergartners expected to eliminate historical and contemporary injustices? Does fighting for a longer recess count? This week, 2 administrative law judges in Minnesota agreed with us in part. Judge Eric L. Littman concluded that asking students to apply lessons from the past in order to eliminate historical and contemporary injustices was unduly vague, and it would be implausible to expect students to carry out the actual elimination of some injustice in order to graduate. Judge Littman recommended that the standards be amended slightly to comply with state law. One suggested change was for the standard to require students to apply lessons from the past that could eliminate historical and contemporary injustices. With that rewrite, students do not have to be successful in their mandated political activism. Otherwise, the social studies standards were approved by Judge Lippman. He concluded that the department was free to add separate ethnic studies standards and that the rest of the standards were objective and measurable. The Chief Administrative Law Judge, Jenny Starr, agreed with Judge Lippman's findings in full. Now, the department must either amend the vague portion of the ethnic studies standards and submit it again to Chief Judge Starr for review, or submit the rule as written to the Legislative Coordinating Commission in the State House and Senate for comment. Most likely, the department will make some form of Judge Lippman's suggested changes. These edits are minor and leave the substance of the ethnic studies recommendation in place. The rest of the social studies standards, however, may be adopted as final by the department and implemented for the 2026 and 2027 school year. Any person aggrieved by this order could bring an additional challenge to the social studies standards in the Minnesota Court of Appeals under Minnesota's Administrative Procedure Act in the next 30 days. Here at the Upper Midwest Law Center, we are concerned that the department is allowed to continue flouting state law and the U.S. Constitution through vague standards and compelled political activism. Judge Lippman's ruling did not address our major concern that the standards are not grade-level appropriate and that parts of them violate the First Amendment. He also rejected our argument that other parts of the ethnic studies standards are not objective or measurable. We will continue to do what we can to safeguard fundamental freedoms, and we stand against academic standards that compromise those rights. That's it for this week on Minnesota Law Weekly. You can learn more about the Upper Midwest Law Center by visiting umlc.org, and you can also make a confidential, tax-deductible donation on our website or by sending us a check to 8421 Wayzata Boulevard, Suite 300, Golden Valley, Minnesota 55426. And we would urge you to do that. We are fully donor-supported and charge our clients nothing. We are standing up for you in court and want to fight for you on every front. Help us do more for you by making a donation today. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.